Hi, I'm Timothy Farrow with Advanced Protective Services, and welcome to Tidbit Tuesday. In this vlog, we're going to break down private investigations, how investigators work, and how investigators navigate cases throughout their life cycle to case completion. Hello, my name is Timothy Farrow, and I'm the owner of Advanced Protective Services, also known as APS. APS is a corporate security, investigative consulting and training company located in Kennesaw, Georgia. We've been in business for over 30 years. What I'd like to talk about today is something very important: why hiring the right private investigator matters and what to look for. Let's start with licensing. This is one of the first things you should always verify when dealing with any private investigator. In many states, there are two levels of licensing, one for the company itself and one for the individual investigator. Licensing matters because it means that the investigator has met certain requirements: education, experience, background checks, and regulatory standards. Every state has a governing body that oversees private investigators. Usually that's through the Secretary of State's office or a designated licensing board. I would also humbly suggest that you verify every license. The next thing you want to look at is insurance. A professional investigative company should carry insurance as part of running a legitimate business. That insurance is there in the event that something goes wrong, to protect the investigator, the company, and in many situations, the client. And you should also verify the level of coverage and make sure that it's appropriate for the type of case that you're asking them to look into or to investigate. The next thing is experience. Has the investigator handled your type of case before? Investigations, like any profession, has specialties. Some investigators focus on domestic cases, others on corporate investigations, and others on surveillance or digital forensics, fraud, or even missing persons or murder cases. You want to make sure that the investigator you're hiring is familiar with your type of case and understands what's involved. Don't be afraid to ask questions about their experience or request references when appropriate. The next thing to look into is training and continuing education. Some states only require a minimum level of training to become an investigator, but that's just a starting point. Laws change, technology changes, surveillance technique change, digital investigations evolve constantly, and privacy laws continue to develop as technology improves. A professional investigator should stay current with training, legal updates, and investigative methodologies. You should even ask, what was the last training or certification you completed? Now, there's the legal and ethical issues. One of the most important things to understand is investigators must follow the law, just like everyone else. If your investigator tells you that he can get the information no matter what, or make promises of outcomes, that's probably somebody you want to avoid. A professional investigator protects the client, the case, and the integrity of the investigation by staying within the law. Now there's reciprocity or working across state lines. For example, you might have a custody case or a divorce that starts in Georgia, but after the separation, one of the parties moves to Tennessee, or a missing person was last seen in another state. Now your investigation crosses state lines. Private investigator licenses are handled state by state, so a professional investigator needs to understand how to operate legally in other states. Sometimes that involves reciprocity, sometimes working with a licensed investigator in another state, or properly coordinating the investigation with an outside firm. A professional should understand that and be able to explain that to you. Now, the most concerning question is cost considerations, and that's something everyone asks about, and understandably so. But there's something also important to understand here. If an investigation is done poorly, it can cost you more money in the long run. If the work is not documented properly, or the evidence is collected improperly, or even worse, illegally, that evidence would or could be thrown out completely, and then it's useless. Then your attorney has to spend more time correcting these mistakes, which increases the legal costs on the other end. So Hiring the cheapest investigator is not always the best option, because cheap in the long run can become very expensive. Now, what about professional standards? A professional understands that the law is important and needs to be followed. Following proper procedures, documenting everything properly, writing professional reports, communicating clearly with the client and attorneys, and stays well within the current training standards. They understand that their work needs to fit into the legal framework and your business situation. I also encourage to look at reviews. Another thing people often fail to do is look at online reviews. Reviews can be very helpful, but don't just look at the number of stars or the rating scale used. Read the comments, because the comments usually tell you more about how the company operates than the ratings themselves. At the same time, remember that reviews are a one-sided story. Sometimes people leave negative reviews because they didn't like the outcome of their investigation, or they were told something they really didn't want to hear. So if you see something concerning on a review, ask the investigator about it. A real professional should have no problem discussing that with you. At a minimum, you want to ask for at the beginning of hiring a private investigator is this. You should ask for a copy of the company's private investigative license, a copy of the individual license or registration from the investigator handling your case, a copy of the company's insurance certificate, and verify that the coverage is appropriate for the case you're asking them to handle. Now, today we talked about licensing, insurance, experience, training, legal and ethical considerations, working across state lines, cost, professional standards, and a host of other things. And what you should ask for before you hire a private investigator. Hiring a private investigator affects the quality of the information you receive, whether that information is useful or how much money you spend, and sometimes the outcome of your situation. A good investigator doesn't just find information. They protect the client, they protect the case, and the integrity of the investigation. Investigations are really about patterns. Patterns of time, patterns of money, and patterns of behavior. And if you follow those patterns long enough, they'll usually take you to exactly where the truth is hiding. Thank you for joining us for Advanced Protective Services Tidbit Tuesday.